Okay. And just telling you that this is an open session for you, designed for your questions, for your stage. So if you have any comments for the session, don't hesitate to share them in the chat. I know that through the presentation, we will have moments for it, but at the end, we also have around 15 minutes so we can make all your questions. And without any further ado, I will pass the sessions to Judy Mahan, who is the co-founder of AngelGen. She has a very extended experience working with raising and building funds, actually, and along many other things that I'm sure she will tell you a little bit about. She has been training founders and investors both. So she will be with us today, really trying to make it very practical for you to understand, okay, so it's time to build my investors deck. What should I do next? So I really wish you all enjoy the session and make it useful for everyone. Sorry, I need to mute Maria. And I'll be here to support you throughout the session, Judy.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'm so flattered that there's so many people who've logged on from all over the world. It's a treat for me. It's a really special opportunity. So I'll share my screen and launch into the presentation. As Alex said, feel free to ask questions anytime. We can have conversations as we go. That's totally fine. And I'm going to start sharing my screen right now. So here we are. So as Alex mentioned, I have another business partner, Misty Rusk. We founded AngelGen about a year ago. Both Misty and I have worked for the last 10 plus years with startup founders and investors. On the one hand, we train founders to get ready to pitch to investors. And then we train new investors to encourage them. We work with a lot of high net worth individuals who maybe have never invested in startups before, but have had successful careers. And it's to encourage them to take those first steps to understand how to select the right startups and how to make strong investments and build their startup portfolio. So we train on both sides of the coin, if you will. So today we're going to focus really purely on developing your deck, your pitch deck to pitch to investors. And part of that is all in how you're going to tell your story. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to best do that as well. A quick background about me. I was a corporate and securities attorney in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley for many years. And in that role, I represented mostly tech companies in equity funding deals. So I represented startups when they were negotiating their deal terms with investors, with angel groups, with venture capital firms. I've also did some mergers and acquisition work and some IPO work. So that's my background when I first started my career. And after that, I've transitioned into running an incubator program for startups. And now I'm actually in charge of economic development for the whole region of where I live. I live on the central coast of California. So we're exactly halfway between LA and San Francisco. So there's this whole central California region where we don't have as many investors available in our region, but through these programs that we've launched, we've been able to build up that investor group and create a lot of great economic activity in our area. We still work a lot with Silicon Valley and LA, San Diego. We still connect with investors throughout the state, but also really focusing on our local region. So let's dig in. First of all, one thing that you need to remember is, yes, you're sharing a lot of data, a lot of information about your company to the investors, but I would encourage you to do it, to tap into storytelling. You're going to be, what people want to know, so you have to have your elevator pitch ready. People want to know, what do you do? So what's your elevator pitch? But the best way to answer that question is to tell it in the format of a story. You want to connect with the right side of the brain, the emotional side. That it's so crucial, so important. I can't stress that enough. If you can't make an emotional connection with your audience, you've already lost half the battle. So I'm going to again go into some details on how to best do that. And actually, you know, this is just something I want to highlight for, I'm guessing there are probably a lot of engineers here today in the Zoom room. And that's especially difficult for engineers. Engineers are amazingly, you know, I'm always so amazed and impressed by all the innovation and technology that they come up with. But there's a tendency to have a very linear thought process that's very, very, very rational, very pragmatic, very based on facts and data. And that sometimes it is hard for engineers to share the storytelling piece, the emotional piece of the innovation, and to make the connection there. So anyway, we'll get into more details on that. And so how are we going to do this? So remember, you're not, and this is for the business people in the room. So the engineers have their own way their brains are wired and the way they tend to share information. On the business side, the business people, they tend to be in the mode of trying to sell. They just want to sell the product, the service. They're passionate about it, but they tend to be in sell mode a lot. So for those people, the idea is, the people who are wired that way, is don't sell. You're not trying to sell. You're not telling from the engineer perspective. You're not selling from the business perspective. You're just going to show. You're going to show and appeal to your audience. And there's a way to set up the stage. So you set the stage, and we'll show you how to do that. You want to manage expectations. You're leading your audience through the story. You're asking questions, and you're going to answer those questions as you walk through the story. And then you just repeat the process. And every now and then, when you finish your pitch, whatever the pitch might be, you want to make sure you take advantage. By taking advantage is always make a call to action. And we'll go into details on that. If you're talking to investors, you want to be asking for money. If you're talking to a potential customer, at some point you do want to ask them whether or not they want to buy the product. So always remember to close with whatever the ask is in your pitch. Never leave a pitch without an ask at the end. Maybe you're talking to someone who could be a potential mentor. Ask for advice, ask for coaching. So let's get into more details on this. So setting the stage. And remember, okay, so 80% of your success is going to be determined by the very first sentence that comes out of your mouth. So that first sentence is so key. And if you're able to do it in a way where you're setting the stage, you're helping people get curious about what you're doing, you want to have a protagonist, someone that people can identify to. Who's the main character of your story? Who's that person? Where are they? What's their environment that they're in? Where do they live? Were they in an office? Are they doing something, an activity? Then there's a conflict, right? There's some kind of pain, problem that person is experiencing. So that's your plot. That's how you build your story. So they're facing a problem, and then you want your audience to feel that problem, and then you want them to understand why they should care, right? So that's all about setting up that stage. And so it sounds complex, but it can be something pretty simple. For example, let's say someone who's, I think the example I was trying to focus on is, let's talk about, HubSpot, a CRM system that helps you manage your sales and marketing pipeline. So here's a nice way to ask a question. So you want to ask questions throughout your that's the whole managing expectations, asking questions and answering questions. You could start with something that says, did you know that on average, marketers spend half of their workday pulling data and creating reports instead of spending time on revenue generating activities? So you could build that up a little bit by explaining who the marketer is. But the fact that they're spending half their day pulling data, creating reports, instead of doing the revenue generating activities, that's a problem. That's a massive, massive problem. There's a conflict there. another example, I'm going to launch into, let's see, into some other examples right here. Oops. Am I still sharing my screen?
No, not at the moment. You
Okay.
just stopped.
Okay. So here's a slide deck that I think is very compelling. So here's a startup. They've created a shoe with a removable heel. They have the patented technology on the shoe. So here's the problem. They explain a lot about women in New York, and here are all the issues that they're dealing with. They have to swap out their heels. They walk home barefoot. They spend money on cabs because they can't stand walking in their heels anymore. And 71% of them say that women say that heels hurt. So they've explained the problem here. And then, well, I'm going to go back to the pitch deck, actually. I'll come back to these examples after. You'll see how relevant the questions are. Let's see. So in the slide deck for Passionista, where she's very, very strong at, she asks a lot of questions and answers questions throughout her pitch deck. Not only at the very start, explaining what the problem is and the solution is, but she builds that out through the entire deck that she goes through. So let's see. And then taking advantage, as I mentioned earlier, depending on who you're talking to, you want to make sure that there's an ask. You want to make sure that you do ask for money if you're fundraising and talking to investors. If you're talking to a potential team member, ask them to join the team, be clear in your ask. And if it's a customer, ask them to buy your product. Before we get into the details of the slides, here's some key things to remember. Don't use any jargon. If any terms that you're using are very specific to your industry, even though you're talking to investors, talking to very smart people, it's highly likely they will not know what the technical term you're referring to, what it means. So avoid jargon, use very, very simple, clear words that everyone can understand. No acronyms. Acronyms are, for example, I run an SBDC. If I say SBDC, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's the Small Business Development Center. So always use the full words of the organizations, the technical terms that you're using, use the full words. And if it's too complex, what I might just say is I run a business center. I'm not going to use the full spelled out acronym because it doesn't matter. It's not necessarily relevant. People just need to get a clear understanding of the general picture. The one biggest mistake that people make in their pitch decks is that people tend to want to talk about how the product works. They get really sucked into all the features, all the things that this product can do. Try to stay away from that. The point of the pitch deck is not to explain how the product works. It's to talk about the problem you're solving. It's to talk about your market, your go-to-market strategy, your team, how you're going to execute. That's the purpose of the deck. The deck is not to explain how the product works. And also another big mistake, I think, is people they do try to be everything to everyone. It's great to have a niche market. It's really very strong and very compelling if you are able to explain that this isn't a product for everyone, but you understand exactly who your targets are and you understand the strategy of how to connect with that target. So that's pretty key as well. So now we're going to launch into the template, and that's when I think it'll make more sense if I pull in the examples from other templates as we go through the actual template here. Okay, let's see. So the very first slide is going to be your elevator pitch. why do you exist? What's your mission? What's your vision? So on each of these, your pitch deck is going to be about 12 slides max. We really encourage you. You need to be able to go through your pitch deck in about 10 minutes for the most part. Most investors will give you 10 minutes to pitch, which will be followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. So 12 slides is pretty much the maximum number of slides you can probably fit in that time. And on this one, the very first one, the elevator pitch, again, is that 80% of your success, right, is dependent on that slide. This is where you're going to, this is your hook. This is where you're going to share the vision of what it is that you're doing. If this is the investor criteria, so on each slide I've explained, here on the left-hand side is where you're going to be score pretty poorly with investors. And the more you contract towards the end here, the best criteria is the one on the right, the more likely the investors will be interested in what you're doing. So they want to see a trendy, a hot investment area, right? So if you can share the excitement there about the industry that you're in, and really share a very compelling mission and show that you're committed to a long-term, you have a long-term goal of where it is that you want to take this.
Judy, can I stop you for a second? I think we're seeing the wrong screen. We're still seeing the Passionista screen.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for mentioning that. Okay.
You're welcome. Just don't want to miss the content.
So much. So as I was going through the slides, you probably weren't seeing all these either. Okay, so we're here.
We're still seeing the Passionista thing.
Could it be because you shared the window and not the full screen? So I think we need to stop and then, yeah, reshare it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Taya. And Mary.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So sorry about that. So this is where we were. So, okay, you probably thought I was just rambling without the slides. Sorry about that. So here's the pitch deck, and here are the criteria on each slide that, that you can see. So your elevator pitch to start. And I'm going to see if there's a way I can go back and forth. Okay, we'll keep going. The next one is the market problem and the solution. So investors are going to want to see that there's immediate market demand for the product or service that you have to offer. And the solution must be, it has to be a must-have. It has to be a need. It's not something that would be nice to have, but not crucial, right? So let's see. I'm hoping to see, okay, we'll keep going. Market size is key. Market size is really, really, really crucial. Investors want to see a huge, huge addressable market. They want to see something that's very scalable, very high growth. That's very, very crucial to them. If they don't see the market size, they won't be able to see a return on their investment. They need to see a company that's going to eventually, you know, be, the vision is to hit, you know, 100 million in revenue at some point in time. That's when they will see their ROI, the return on their investment. So that is very crucial, very important. I'm going to show you examples here of ways you can present your market size. So, by the way, this is the Passionista slide deck. So what I wanted to share here is she shared her target markets, and in every slide or a lot of her slides, there's always a question. Who are the Passionistas? Who are the women who are interested in these shoes? She's asking the question, she's answering them here. These are the problems that they're having. Business women, working mothers, college women, brides, flight attendants, they all have issues with heels. So she's identifying all the problems. She's identifying all her target segments. and she starts and she's introducing this with her questions on who they are. So she's showing that she understands her market really well. She understands what their problems that they're having. And then she launches into the solution, the heal. She explains that it is the technology behind it without going into too much detail. And the way she's chosen to identify her market is right here. So she's looked at the luxury footwear market in the US, a $2 billion market. So typically you do want to see a market that's at least in the, $1 billion or more. She's also looking at the women's total US footwear market. So that's the larger market. This is the more direct market that she can hit. But she also addresses the global online market because she is an online platform. She's selling direct to consumer online. So there's a lot of potential for her to sell internationally, and she's been able to highlight that in her slide. So that's one way of showcasing your different markets. Here with WildNote, so actually here's their elevator pitch. So this is a company that is offering an app on the phone. It's a platform to be able to collect, manage, and report environmental data all in one space. And this is a space that up until very recently was still being done with pen and paper out in the field. There was no platform to help streamline the process. Environmental compliance is huge in the US. Any major infrastructure project throughout the country needs to comply with a lot of reporting. And she's the first one that came up with a software to help manage that. The way she's chosen to talk about her market is a little different here. She's looked at, she has a $1.5 billion market. So again, she's in the 1 billion plus area, which is perfect. She's looking at international markets, US markets. She's broken it down into different segments. So it shows that she understands her total serviceable market, but also understands the different segments within that market. So two great examples to showcase your markets. On the one hand, we have who's the Passionista, broken down into 6 different segments. And here we have who are the people who need to comply with environmental compliance. We have nonprofits, NGOs, environmental in the US, international. So lots of different segments there as well. Let me go back to, so the market is important. Do your market research, whatever it is you need to do to get access to the right data. Customer segments, we talked about that with Passionista. It was very clear who her segments are. If you don't understand your segments, if you can't highlight your segments, your investors are going to question, how are you going to go to market? How are you going to know what strategy to implement to connect with those markets? In the Passionista slide, you can see that working moms are probably hanging out on, more likely to be on Pinterest, on Facebook. Those are the stay-at-home target markets, but maybe the professional woman is spending more time on Twitter and on LinkedIn. So what is her strategy going to be to connect on these social platforms to connect with those right markets? The strategies are going to be completely different. And that's another thing that investors are very, very aware of. If you don't understand the segments, if you can't showcase your strategy on how you're going to connect with your segments, you're not going to make sales. If you don't make sales, there's going to be no revenue. If there's no revenue, your company is going to fail. So everything has a reason because it leads you to that next step, which allows you to, at the end of the day, it's all about generating revenue. How are you going to make money? If you're not going to make money, your investors are not going to make money. So keep that in mind as well. And here are the criteria again. If you're very vague on the customer types and what their needs are, you're going to score very low in the investor's mind. if you have clear customer segments and you understand what their needs are and you can back it up with the right data. Again, we saw on the first slide with Passionista, she had percentages broken down on all the different pain points and all the needs that all her segments have. So it's a very, very strong pitch in that regard. Next is the value proposition and how, again, how are you going to connect with those segments? What are your channels? How are you going to reach those customers? The value prop is how, once you've identified those segments, those customer segments, sometimes you have to keep in mind, for example, for some of you, let's say you're offering software as a service, you might have a B2B model and a B2C model. Maybe the pricing will be different. What is the perceived value from your customer perspective? And how can that affect your pricing? Again, it goes back to that revenue generation. How are you going to generate revenue? Where are you going to focus your attention? Where are your higher margins? You need to be able to explain all that. Distribution, so you go to market strategy. So many different ways to attain the market. It can be by partnering with key affiliate partners. That's important. It's not only just your sales and marketing strategy. So you need to be able to identify your marketing plan. Make sure you've built out a really strong marketing plan that you can showcase to your investors. And what I've often seen them, the question that always comes up that a lot of startups aren't always quite ready to answer, and it is a difficult question to answer, I'll give you that. But what are your customer acquisition costs? So for every dollar that you spend in marketing, whether it is the money you spend on hiring a salesperson, interns, all the work you're doing on their social media platforms, your Google ads that you're buying, your Facebook ads, your Google AdWords, all these items. What are the KPIs? What are which are the key performance indicators? Are you tracking metrics? Are you looking at the analytics? Are you looking at the results that you're getting based on all this money that you're spending to try and acquire customers? That's really, really important. Investors want the information that you share doesn't have to be exact, but investors want to understand that you've thought it through, that you have estimates in place, that you recognize that there's a cost associated to acquiring every customer. And what does that look like? So you might say, well, we're going to spend $1,000 a month on Facebook ads. And we think that with every $1,000 that we spend, we're going to acquire X number of customers. Well, maybe the reality is when you implement, you'll have spent $500 and gotten twice the number of customers, which is awesome. Or maybe it's the opposite of that. That doesn't matter. Investors just want to see that you've thought it through, that you have projections in place, and that you're keeping that in mind as a cost, and that you understand that you need to track the data, track the analytics to make sure that you understand where you're spending money, and that you understand that you're going to adapt where you're spending depending on the results you're getting. So that's important. Revenue streams, of course, back to the point I made earlier, you want to make sure that you need to identify exactly how you're making money. The more revenue streams, the better. We've actually, COVID's been a great example. If you have just one main revenue stream, for example, I'll give you the basic example of a restaurant. If they weren't online, if they're not offering delivery service, if they weren't offering products maybe that they're selling as part of their marketplace, if they hadn't diversified their revenue streams, they suffered a lot more greatly when the restaurants shut down. The restaurants that had already in place a lot of these systems, a lot of these other revenue streams parallel to just indoor dining, were able to survive and pivot and get back on their feet a lot faster. So multiple revenue streams are important. That's definitely compelling for investors. And they also want to understand the business model as a whole is, how are you going to scale? Will there be economies of cost? So can you prove that the more you scale, the less expensive it is to provide your service or your product? That's always very, very compelling for investors as well, because that means that the more money they're putting in, the more you're scaling, the bigger your margins are going to get, because the less it's going to cost you to provide that service or that product. So if you can prove that, that's very, very compelling to investors. Your competition. You have to understand your competition. So here I'm going to also go back to the other slides just to make it a bit more interesting here for us. So here, let's see, here's one way of showing your competition. This is a very standard way. You pick two axes of qualities that are sought after by your end user, by your end customer. How easy is it to obtain data collection and to track the data, and then the software format that she's using. So she's separating herself out from all the competition here and what they're offering in this format. With Passion, what she did was a more traditional way of comparing herself to the competition. Here are some brands on the left-hand side, and she's comparing each one. Some are not fully convertible. Some have a much higher price point than she does. She's much more competitive on price. Some have, their systems are not as fully removable as her system. The technology is not as good. And then most of them are available online, but this is the way she chose to compare herself to other models out there. So that's another option of how to compare to the competition, but it shows that you understand that there's competition out there. One thing I'd like to recommend is never ever tell your investors that there is no competition, because that's going to scare them away. It's a healthy thing to have competition. Competition's a good thing. It shows that it is a hot and trendy market, that a lot of people are trying to pierce the market, but just show your investors how and why you're better than them, than the competition. And then what's your competitive advantage? So ideally, you saw in the Passionista slide deck that she has IP, she has a patent on the technology. So she's built up a lot of value there by having a patent filed internationally. Another advantage is maybe there's competition, but you're that much further ahead. You already have traction in the market. So your product is ready. You already have users, buyers in place. You're first to market. Maybe you've got a better user UX UI design. Your user experience is better. Your design is better. You've got your IP. Those are the two main areas, basically. What is it that you do faster, better, more efficiently? Those are other criteria as well. Cheaper. Those are some of the other elements. IP is big. First to market's big. User experience and design is big. And then faster, cheaper, and more efficient are also some of the criteria that you can use. Team is crucial. The team is incredibly important. Investors invest once they see that it's compelling, that there's a need for the product or service. Once they see the very large addressable market, the third main big thing that they look at is definitely the team. Are you going to be able to execute? Because they also understand the reason they don't get too bogged down on the actual technology or service is they understand that it's going to pivot and change over time. The product or service that you start off with today, it's highly unlikely that it'll be the same product or service 6 months from now, 12 months from now. It's going to evolve, it's going to change. You're going to get customer feedback and you're going to realize, oh, my customers, would rather see this, a 3-inch heel than a 6-inch heel, or whatever it is. You're going to get some feedback and you're going to make adaptations. But what they want to see is that the team is able to understand that, to receive feedback, to make the pivots that you need to make when you need to make them. And again, that you're able to execute, that you're coachable, that you're driven. That's really, really important. If you're a solo founder, typically they would prefer to see co-founders. Investors are usually pretty reserved about even considering talking to a solo founder. So think about bringing on co-founders as soon as you can. It's very hard to wear all the hats for an extended period of time. You need your tech person in place. You need your business person in place. You need your operations person in place. This is some of the 3 key areas. And also for some of you who are on the call, I work with a lot of founders who are extremely young. They've just graduated from college. They're 21 years old. They're starting their company. This is a really hard one for them because it's hard for them to check in, especially this last one, the confidence to achieve strong results. If you're very green and you don't have a ton of experience when you're 21, it just is what it is. You're 21, so there's only so much experience you have in the startup world. So what we do with our startups that are that young, and actually for all of our startups, is we mandate, like, they have to put in place an advisory board. An advisory board is going to be something a little bit informal. It's before you get a lot of investment. It's maybe 3 to 5 people that you're going to meet with once a month, maybe once a quarter. And you're going to fill those gaps with experts. You're going to find your industry expert. You're going to find the sales and marketing expert. And these are the people that you're going to brainstorm with once a month. And they're not there for you to report to them how well you're doing or look at all this great, traction that we have. That's not the point of the advisory board. The advisory board is a group of people that have a lot of experience. So shoot for the stars, connect through LinkedIn, connect through your network. Don't hesitate to reach out for your dream team. Ask them to come on board, volunteer some time. If they bring things to the table, you can always offer a little bit of equity in your business. But this is the team that you're going to share your problems with, and they're there to help you solve problems. So I can't, if there's one best practice to take away as you prep for this, as you prep to talk to investors, setting up an advisory board is a really key important factor. Let's see. And the traction's important. And I know a lot of startups, again, it's what we call the chicken and the egg problem. On the one hand, you need funding to get traction, but you need traction to get funding. It's a tough one. It's really, really hard. But do whatever bootstrapping you need to do to get some traction before you talk to investors. And the more traction you have, which can be under different forms, it can be maybe you're actually generating revenue already, which is fantastic. And you can show, even if it's in tiny small increments, but if you can show, we made $500 this month and or last month, and this month we hit $1,000. It's not so much the dollar amounts themselves. It's just you're showing that that it's starting to snowball, that more people are joining, more people are coming on board. If you can show an increase in number, it's not so much the number itself, it's showing that there's a pattern of ramping up. That's more important. And investors recognize that. They know you're bootstrapping, they know it's hard. But if you can show that it's ramping up in the revenue, the number of users, you know, getting your patent filed, that's traction. That shows that you have something that's very innovative, that no one else is doing quite the same way as you are. So all these, whatever items you can showcase to show that you're onto something. Financials, again, very important. Your investors here, it's not so much that they do need to be realistic. You do need to show projections on what it will potentially look like. You want your investors to get excited about what it can look like in the long term. So 12 months out, 3 years out, your investors know that those projections are wrong. We all know that they're wrong. We all know that we're just guessing as to what it might look like. But again, here, what your investors want to see is your thought process. How did you come up with those numbers? How did you think that through? It's more about how are you backing up those numbers with the strategy that you have in place to try and achieve those numbers. So it's all about the strategy you've built up. It's not about the reality of the numbers themselves. I mean, they can be completely crazy off the wall, but you know, they have to be somewhat realistic. But your investors understand that they're not, you know, they won't hold you to them. They just want to understand how you're thinking. And the exit strategy. So this one, it's more about, yes, the investors need to see what the return on their investment is going to be. But here, what I try to advise is, it's highly likely you will get acquired. Some companies will do, you know, do a public, an IPO, will go on the public markets, on NASDAQ or whatever public market. But the odds are it is highly more likely that you will eventually get acquired by a larger company. So that goes back to the competition slide a little bit, and also understanding what's going on in the industry. I always recommend highlighting a couple of big acquisitions that have taken place within your industry. So has Google or Facebook or some other major corporation acquired a similar company to yourself in a similar space? And if so, for how much? If you can show acquisitions that are taking place for $100 million or more, that's fantastic. Like anything that's happened in the last 12 months that shows that there's acquisition activity in the space that you're in. So that's the key there. And then the ask, as mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you always end with an ask. So how much are you trying to fundraise? Make sure that you're asking for enough money to last you for 12 to 18 months. Again, investors know that fundraising is hard. It takes a lot of time. It takes you away from your business and from running the business. So they want to make sure you have enough money for at least the next 12 to 18 months. So then you can focus on the business, you know, and explain what milestones you hope to hit once you've raised that money. What are you going to be able to put in place to add value to the business and to help you grow and hit specific milestones? And that's pretty much it. I do want to go back to the other slides a little bit just to show you a few more examples. I know this is a little, let's see. Here, as you can see, for Passionista, she's explained all her different sales channels, the different markets she's hitting. She's looking here at the social media platforms. This is her digital marketing campaign. She's looking at the cost per click. She's definitely done her analysis. One of her other targets was the airline industry. She has contracts in place, and she has contacts. So she talks about that. And for the bridal market, she has strategies in place, discounts in place to hit that market. So she's got her strategy. She explains it. KPIs. These are important. She's further down the road, but this shows that she's got specific data that she's tracking. And this is going to help her analyze her customer acquisition costs right here, right? So that's something we talked about earlier. How do you know how much money you're spending to get a customer once they've made their purchase? You know, are you breaking even? Are you spending too much money to get the one customer or not? You need to know that. So she gives very clear KPIs, key performance indicators here that she shows that she's tracking. Here are her financial projections over the next couple of years. So you probably only really need to go 12 to 18 months out. Again, she highlights her team, some of their experience, and this is her ask. She's raising 1.25 million on a convertible note, and she explains very clearly on this slide how she's going to spend those funds and what she's going to accomplish with the funding that she's raising right now. So really highlight and show that you know exactly what you're going to be doing with the funding that you're raising. While note, we can go through a slide a little bit. Here's her core team. She's got sales, operations, product is the software side. So she's got her tech person, her operations person, her business person in place. Key areas where you want key people in place. And this is her ask. She's explaining exactly how much she's raising. And she says this is what she's going to get to once she raises her $350,000. She is going to be making $50,000 in monthly recurring revenue. So she has a very specific goal that she wants to achieve once she's raised that money. She's highlighted here, so she wants to get acquired in 3 to 5 years. So that's the exit strategy. And possible acquirers, Google Earth is one, Cardo, Boundless, Constellation Software. So she's identified some key players in her software space that could possibly acquire her. And when she shares when she presents the slides, she explains what other deals are going on and for how much within that space. So I'll stop share now. So, I shared a ton of information. Hopefully it was helpful and useful. And sorry about the hiccup on the slides at the start there. I apologize. And I hope the information wasn't too dry. One thing, maybe if there are questions, I'm happy to take questions, but there is one thing I wanted that Passionista does really well that I want to highlight. It was all the questions she asks throughout her slide deck that I think is really compelling.
Thank you, Judy. If you want to make questions, I already see that some people are sharing the questions. So do share them in the Slack and I'll be reading them to you, Judy, if you'd like to help you. So we'll start with Emma's question, saying, question 2, actually, I don't know if you've shared. No, it's above. Okay. So is it clear that investors want to know a lot of details, but they also only want 10 slides in 10 minutes? So how to communicate everything they want to know about your financial security, for one example, and still have enough slides left over to discuss the market, the problem, the solution, etc.
Yeah. So I spent a lot talking about each slide. It seemed like a lot, but truly it's only 12 slides. And basically you're trying to spend about just under a minute for each slide. So that's the strategy. Your slides, don't put too many words, too much information on each slide. Passionista does have a lot of content on her slides. WildNote is a bit lighter. Don't get into too much detail on any of the slide. Present the key information, keeping in mind that there is a Q&A session after you present. So your investors will then have 20 minutes to ask questions. And that's when you can take a deep dive into the details. So have your 12 slides, 3 key bullets on each slide, 3 key items that you want to share on each slide to support the information that you need to share on that slide. And then what you can do is have an annex of slides. And when the investors ask questions, you can say, you can answer something like, oh, yes, let me show you the more detailed financials. Here they are. And you pull up that slide. It doesn't have to be part of the slide deck, so that saves you time. So as you saw from the Passionista slide, it was a very, very simple projections, right? Her slides were, it was 3 columns, 4 rows, very, very simple budget, very simple projections. But when the investors asked for the details of how she's going to spend the money and so on and so forth, she has a slide that's ready to go in the annex that she can pull up, and then you can say, oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. You pull it up and then you can go into the details. So that's what I would recommend.
Great tip, actually. There's a second question also from Emma, which is about an observable discrimination against female entrepreneurs. So she asks, won't investors then be consciously or unconsciously turned off by the Passionistas' clearly feminine approach? And yes, I would love to hear also, Judy, your comments on your experience on this.
Yeah. You know, 100%. It takes, I have to say, investors who have, I mean, she's done really well fundraising, and she's fundraised with 60-year-old white males have invested in her company. So she's been able to connect with that. I think what's been very helpful to Haley is that, number one, she has patented technology. So there's a lot of value in the IP. She's the only one who's figured out the reality of a fully removable heel where the shoe transforms into a flat seamlessly. I think the way she connects with the male investor audience is most males have encountered that situation where maybe they've been out one evening with their daughters, with their wives, with other women, where the women have taken off their heels so they can go dance barefoot, or they walk barefoot back to the car, or the husband has said, your feet hurt, I'll go get the car and bring it back. Or they've had that experience. That's a story you can share and they can relate to. So I think they can relate to the problem. I really do think they can. And at the end of the day, then you focus also on the reality of the business model. The business model it's a giant market, $2 billion in the US, and that's just a small segment of it. I think for any investors, if they see a market of $1 billion or more, check that box. They're ready to listen, as long as they can see the large addressable market. I think some data that you can use also, 80% of purchasing decisions for any product or service are made by women. Women make most of the purchasing decisions, period, in the world. So, it's all about if you feel that your product is too female facing or too feminine or whatever it is, just share the real data, share the market research, share the numbers, share the dollar numbers. And I think that's how you connect with your investors. At the end of the day, the investors, it's all about the money. And they need to be, if they can follow the money and understand where it's coming from, then they can wrap their head around the market. If it's a woman-focused market.
And if it's about the founding team and a bias, I'm sure that if you prepare the most as possible, back up, show why you're the best person to move that project, and it gets a bit easier. But it is true that it's still there's still a lot of challenges on that end. We'll have a session, also other sessions to cover that, so do join. And Nicholas then shared the question about which size should be the market have at least to be attractive to investors.
I mean, the rule of thumb is $1 billion or more. It's a big market. It's a lot, but that's sort of the. It's pretty generic. I mean, don't take it too literally, but yes, very large.
Are you able to share those 2 pitch decks from the companies you showed us? And do you also have examples you could share with us?
So I'll have to ask the founders if I can share their decks. One thing I did want to go over real quick, if we have a second, because this is what I really, really love about the Passionista deck, is on a lot of her slides, let's see, and sorry, it's in PDF, so it's a little hard. You know, I like that she asks, who are the Passionistas? Again, it's that sort of question and answer. So she's managing the expectations, right? She's asking, who are the Passionistas? Hey, check it out, here they are. And not only is she showing you who they are, but she's sort of hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. She's also showing you that she very clearly understands her segments. So she's accomplishing so many things in just this 1 slide. She's engaging you. She's asking a question. So you're wanting to answer that question. And then she's showing you she understands the market. And she does it throughout. There's a couple other areas where she does it. Let's see. Design possibilities question. Is it just a heel that turns into a sandal? No. There's the pump, there's the boots, there's the stiletto. I mean, there's all these. So she asks questions and the answer is awesome. It's unlimited. Any design you can think of. Let's see. There's a couple of other areas where I know she does it.
We'll also be sharing the recording so you guys can also recap to see and review everything. So don't worry.
So anyway, that's a nice way to use the questions throughout your deck. Yeah.
I love that they show the stories. That's definitely, they showing what they do just by sharing who they are. So that's, I really like that tip too. And another question, what is the difference between a pitch deck and the business plan, from Manuel?
That's a good question. So the pitch deck, like I said, so you're just sharing sort of high level information, some of the key areas. You're sharing 2-3 bullets on this 12 slide deck. Your business plan is going to go into much more detail. You're going to really spell everything out. It's going to be maybe 30 pages long. It's much more detailed. I would say the pitch deck truly is a summary of your business plan. Maybe that's one way of looking at it. I don't know if that's helpful, if that makes sense. But your business plan is going to be a lot more blown out. Yeah.
Okay, another question from Nicholas. When you are still in the beginning and haven't launched yet, should you already show the full potential of the business model, even if it will take 2 years to actually accomplish? Or do you only recommend to show the business model relevant in the following 3 years?
In the following, so.
Sorry, would you like me to repeat? So since you're in the beginning, should you show the full potential of the business model, or do you only recommend showing the business model as you evolve through the 3 years? If I'm not mistaken, Nicholas, feel free to comment if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yes, totally right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I think you can go beyond the 3 years to show, again, you're sharing this, you want to share the vision. I mean, so investors find that very compelling. They if you go, you can go 5 years out. It shows that you're committed, that you're in it for the long haul, that you have a vision. They like founders who are leaders and who want to commit long term and who are very driven to achieve strong results. So I would feel okay going as far out as you feel comfortable. They understand that it's going to take 2 years to actually get some real traction, it takes at least 2 years. So really, it's 2 years to get going, and then yes, 3 years to see the snowball effect. So even if you go 5 years out, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Kendra, which is, how can I pitch the new stream of revenue for a business that is already in operation? Is this new stream of revenue almost like a business in itself? So should I focus on the overall business or have the new stream of revenue as a focus? Interesting.
Well, I think that's a good question. If you already have a business that's in operation, that can be your current traction, right? So that you can use that to show, I have traction, I have revenue, I have this revenue stream that's working really well, and there's monthly recurring revenue. I would definitely not separate it out. I mean, it just depends on if it's connected to what you're doing or not. If it's something completely different, then maybe it is a different business for sure. But if it complements what you're doing, and if you're using the current traction that you have, the current revenue that you have to support this new stream, that's fantastic. So yes, you should absolutely keep it connected, and show that you have this traction that is supporting the launch of this new revenue stream. So I would keep them together if they're relevant to each other, because it makes it that much stronger of a proposition.
Then we have a question from Nikos as well, but more on the aspect of, if you don't have traction so far, you're not selling, how should you address this before launching the company?
Yeah, and that's so hard. That's the hardest place to be in. I can relate so much. There's different ways to show traction. On the one hand, you can show that you have a patent pending. So you've put a lot of work and effort into some technology. You've done some R&D. You've already invested all that time and energy and brain power into that. You can showcase that you've built out your team. Maybe you started solo and you brought on 2 co-founders. That's traction, actually. That shows that you've been able to convince 2 other people to join your team. That's a big deal. That means that there's 2 other people out there who believe in what you're doing, who see the opportunity, and who are willing to jump on board. People sometimes forget to mention that. And so that's a great thing to highlight. If there's a way, we had a company that was able to get a lot of traction on social media, just have people interested in what they were doing before they were ever selling anything. So definitely having a mailing list, a user list, a follower list, the bigger the numbers, the better. And like I said, the numbers themselves don't necessarily matter that much. It's more showing that it's increasing over time, and being able to show increase over time. It's like, okay, you're onto something. We know that you're only 3 months in, we get it. So it's not you don't have 1 million followers, that's fine. But if you can show that you had 50 followers on day 1 and that you have 500 on day 60, like, oh, there's something there. There's something going on. What's going on? So just try to focus on, sometimes you're so into your thing and you're struggling and you're bootstrapping and it's hard that you forget to take a step back and to realize, okay, where was I 3 months ago and what's happened in the last 3 months? Just focus on your accomplishments, like whatever they are. It can be, like I said, bring a co-founder on board. That's huge. That's a really big deal. So just look at where you were at 3 months ago and where you're at today, and look at what's happened. And then focus on the positives, on what's taken place during that time.
We have a lot of questions actually, so I'm sorry if we cannot cover all of them. I'm going to try to put a few that are similar together. And Jose asked you a very practical tip, which is if you have a few tips on how to convince someone to be in your advisory board, what should be the incentives? How can you address?
Yeah. That's a great question. Typically, you don't ask someone out the door if they'll be on your advisory board. So what I recommend to the founders that I work with is just invite someone out to coffee or a Zoom meeting, or and just say, look, I just want 15 minutes of your time. I would love to get your feedback on one specific item, right? On one specific question, one specific area. Most people, once you start talking, the 15 minutes quickly becomes 30 minutes, 45 minutes. So then you can leverage that. And the more, I think the best way to start is to tap into someone's expertise, ask them for just advice on a specific issue, and then see how the conversation goes. If there's a connection, you'll know. If the person seems to be like, okay, fine, I'll give you 5 minutes. I mean, pick up on the emotional, social cues of whether or not the person has any additional interest in what you're doing. But always start off by asking people for their advice based on their expertise in a specific area. And typically people love to share their knowledge, and most people like to give back and like to support founders who are starting something new, innovative, and interesting. So, is if you believe in what you're doing, you're going to be able to share that excitement and be very genuine in the advice that you're seeking out. If you're genuinely seeking advice, people will connect with that.
So I'll share one from Gilbert, which is quite different from the others, which is if it's worth to waste much time trying to educate an investor about a market they have no knowledge about, or simply focus on seeking for those investors that have the knowledge about the market where you are?
That's a good question. No, I mean, I would lean towards, if it is a large market, it's more about showing that you've done your research and that you've done your homework. If you can explain how big the market is, how big the opportunity is, and if you can show, again, back to Passionista, how well you understand that market, investors, they may not know your market, they may not have a deep understanding of your industry, but they're very savvy. They're typically, they've had their successes, they've been entrepreneurs themselves. So typically, I mean, they get it, they understand. It's about how well prepared you are. And I think the better prepared, the better you understand your market, it's all about that customer development, right? Have you done your 100 interviews to understand who your market is and what they want? Not so much what they want, but what they need. Like, what do they really need? Do they really have a problem? And are you really solving their problem? That's the value proposition, right? So, actually, it's great that we sort of veered into that. The more customer development you do, the more interviews you have with the more people, the better you understand that market, and the better you'll be able to represent that to your investors. Investors need to trust that you understand the market. If they trust that you understand it, that's fine. They don't need to have a deep understanding. Like, to someone else's point, most male investors won't understand women, the heel market, the high-heeled shoe market, but that's okay because the numbers are there and the numbers are very, very compelling.
So one last question. I will go for Salima. Sorry, because I know you had a few more and other people. We'll have, at some point we have to choose. I will make sure to also bring your questions to the next session. And she asks a different thing, which is about impact-driven ventures. How important is it to showcase the impact and theory of change within the deck?
So, I mean, if your company is, a impact-driven startup, then yes, of course. I mean, that's a key part of your deck. Sometimes, so you are talking to investors. It depends on which investor you're talking to. If you're talking to social impact investors, then yes, they want, and sometimes you can have different decks for different investor groups, right? So that's something, don't feel shy about that, actually. That's a good point. You can have a specific deck for a specific type of investor and a slightly different deck for a different type of investor, and that's okay. For your social impact investor, the reason they invest is because they want to achieve those results, right? And the results is mitigating some kind of impact on the environment, social change. So that's what you need to prove, is what you're going to achieve through your business and attain those milestones through the investment you're going to get. If it's a more traditional investor, they do want to see the revenue stream and the potential return on their investment. So you can dissociate the two value propositions, right? In one case, the value proposition is the impact you're having and the problem you're solving for the environment or for social change. And for the more traditional investor is you're doing that by addressing a specific need, you're solving a pain to generate revenue, and you're going to focus on that portion of the business model. I'll give you an example. I have a company, Shamrock Greens. They have some patented technology to grow dark leafy greens and herbs indoors. It's very revolutionary. There's a lot of indoor growing happening here in California in these giant warehouses, indoor greenhouse, warehouse type setups. But they've taken it a couple of steps further, where what they're growing, the herbs, the dark leafy greens are just, they're getting 5 times the size and the results in the growth of the plants. And they're able to grow on demand, completely based on the grocery store demand. So if the grocery store says, I need kale, I need basil, I need dill, they can produce on demand at a much faster pace. So anyway, on the one hand, so the problem they're solving is for grocery managers, grocery store managers that are constantly trying to get product from the right place at the right time to fit what the consumers want. That's their pain point. They don't want to have produce that rots on the shelves, right? They need to have on the shelves exactly what their consumers want. So the founder is going to present the information a certain way. They're going to explain that problem that they're solving for the more traditional investors. On the other hand, the other problem he's solving is he's generating this crazy amount of produce for a much cheaper price with much less environmental impact. He's solving all sorts of problems on the environmental side. So when he's talking to the impact-focused investors, that's the problem he's solving. And so he's going to focus on that problem and solution. So he's actually solving both, but depending on who he's talking to, he's going to highlight one over the other. Does that make sense?
So I saw some questions here. If you want to make a last note about it, about the different pitch decks and what they refer to, because we have the investors deck, we have sales deck, we have a presentation about the company. So if you just want to make a small note around it, because I know some people are asking about it.
So the pitch deck, keep in mind, the whole purpose is you're talking to investors, you're trying to raise money. So it's all about highlighting the business model, the revenue model, how are you going to make money, why it makes sense, and why you need more money to scale to the next level to make more money. It's all about the money. Don't kid yourselves. Yes, it's wonderful if you have a social mission. It's wonderful if you have all these other elements that you're solving this amazing problem. That's great. But the only reason that's great is because it's going to allow you to make a lot of money, and the investors are going to make a lot of money, right? The bottom line is your traditional investors, it is what it is. They're not investing just for fun. That's their business model, is they're making investments to make money. So that's the investor pitch deck. And of course, it depends. Some of you are completely social mission driven, and you're going to appeal to very different category investors that exist. They're out there, and we're seeing more and more of them, and it's super exciting, actually. So I'm not discrediting that in any way, shape, or form. A lot of our companies in our incubator program are very social mission driven. So that's the investor pitch deck, and that's how that's different from any other decks. So I'm not sure. The other ones, yes, they're tailored to your audience. So the culture deck is not going to be about the revenue stream. It's not going to be obsessively focused on the financial side of it. It's going to be focused more on the mission piece than the long-term vision on how you're going to make money. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. I'm afraid we don't have more time for more questions. If you have other questions also, I do invite you to follow Judy's and AngelGen's work. I just shared the website, so you can follow them. They have a lot of very cool initiatives, so also have a look. I see many good comments, so thank you so much, Judy. I think it was a very practical framework, very resourceful, full of references. So it was very generous. Thank you for that. For everyone who's still here, we have another last workshop. I do invite you to check our LinkedIn. We have the sign up link there. It's a fireside chat. It's an interview from first-hand stories, experiences from entrepreneurs, from investors. So it's going to be a more conversational session, and do share your questions, because this is how we're going to build this last session. And from Judy, I'm super thankful. I will share the recording. I will, if you have any other questions, I can also, or comments, I can also forward them to Judy. And I hope it was useful, that everyone enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.